Hey, Todd Hampson here, bringing you another video on Bible prophecy. Today, I'm talking to you about 7 dangers to avoid when studying Bible prophecy. And the first 2 dangers are kind of general in nature, and then the second 5 are really more specific to Bible prophecy. Let's get into it. So the first principle I want to mention to you is pay attention to the context. A good friend of mine has a coffee mug that says, "I can do all things through a verse taken out of context." And it's so true. That verse that we hear so often, "I can do all things through Christ," doesn't literally mean I can do everything. It has a specific context and a certain audience. So another example, I hear often people talk about the valley of the dry bones. Dry bones come to life. There's songs made out of it, taken from Ezekiel chapters 36 and 37, when the army of dry bones comes to life. You have to understand the context and the audience. The context is it's all about Israel becoming a nation again, but people have used it to mean all kinds of things. Now, that doesn't mean there's not general application we can get from that God raises dead things to life. That's definitely what salvation is about. But that specific context about the valley of dry bones is specifically about the nation of Israel coming to life. And we can apply other things to that we can draw application from that. God is a God who keeps his promises. God is a God of prophecy. God is a God who has the end all figured out and mapped out for us. So there's all kinds of applications we can still pull from it without taking it out of context. So be careful there. Another second principle that's more of a general principle is don't be authoritative where you shouldn't be. Deuteronomy 29:29 says, "The secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things revealed to us belong to us and our children forever." So in other words, God doesn't tell us everything, but he tells us everything we need to know to live for him and receive salvation and that kind of thing. So we have to be really careful that we're not connecting dots that aren't there or reading into scripture things that aren't there. We can't be authoritative where there's not enough leeway for us to do so. So we got to be really careful about that. And if you pay attention, you'll see that some people say things too dogmatically or connect dots that aren't there, and they've taken it out of context and they've stepped out of the authority of Scripture and Scripture alone. So now let's get into the 5 specific principles about studying Bible prophecy, the dangers to avoid. And these are really specific to Bible prophecy. Number 1, this is actually number 3, don't allegorize Scripture. When it comes to Bible prophecy, don't allegorize it unless it's clearly allegory, like a parable, for example, is more allegorical. But what I'm saying is when you look at the Old Testament prophecies, they were fulfilled literally and they had meaning. Even if there was symbolism used, and we'll actually get to that in a minute, those symbols have meaning from Scripture. Don't allegorize things that are not meant to be allegorized. The biggie in our day is that all of the promises to Israel are allegorized and conferred on the church. That's called replacement theology, that the church now is receives all the promises that were given to Israel. All kinds of stuff in the book of Revelation has been allegorized to mean all kinds of crazy stuff. But we can't do that, and I'll unpack that with some of these other dangers. Use the same hermeneutic from Genesis to Revelation. A hermeneutic, that's just a fancy word for Bible study method, or the grid through which you interpret Scripture. In other words, if you're using a literal method for the Old Testament, then you use a literal method for the New Testament. You don't switch gears. And again, this ties into the audience, God's promises to Israel versus God's promises to the church and how they all culminate. If God had prophecies and promises in the Old Testament, like let's take Daniel 2 and chapter 2 and chapter 7, for example, prophecies about the empires that were going to come in that area. Those were fulfilled literally. So, and symbols were used, but you can understand exactly what it means. So we use that same interpretation method for the New Testament. Or even more clear example are the 109 specific prophecies about the first coming of Christ with his birth, death, burial, and resurrection. All of those were fulfilled literally. So there's nothing in Scripture that tells us to pivot and then switch gears and then interpret it allegorically after the cross, or when we don't quite understand what it is. So use the same hermeneutic from Genesis to Revelation. The next one is symbols find their meaning in the context of the Bible. This is important. I forget exactly how many symbols there are in Revelation, but I believe it's over 800 if I remember. Oh, I'm sorry, it's over 400. No, I'm sorry, it's over 800 in the 404 verses. And half of those symbols, the meaning is given to you in the context of Revelation. The other half is given to you in the broader context. It's almost like a hyperlink. When you see a symbol in Revelation that's not in the immediate context, it's telling you to hyperlink to somewhere in the Old Testament, usually one of the minor prophets or the major prophets. But you can understand the meaning of those from the Old Testament. For example, when it talks about the Antichrist having 7 heads and 10 horns, you go back to the Old Testament, you see in the book of Daniel and in other books that horns represented the power of a country. Horns represented a country. So you can see that means, and there's also another spot where you link up with Daniel and Revelation where it says that the Antichrist, the little horn, would come up from among other horns and would subdue 3 of them. So he would kind of consolidate power. So there's now only 7 out of the 10, but 10 horns. So it's 10 countries ruled by these 7. And that's a whole nother topic there, how the Antichrist comes to power and then eventually consolidates power in the end times. But anyway, the horn is a leader or a leader of a nation. It has a specific meaning, and you find that meaning in the broader context of Scripture. Now, the next one, pay attention, and I alluded to this earlier, but here it is really specifically, especially with Bible prophecy. Pay attention to the audience and the chronology. Again, going back to the dry bones thing, the audience is clearly to the Jewish people, about the Jewish people. Daniel chapter 9, the whole prophecy is about your people and your city, talking about Jerusalem. So pay very close attention to that. Or you get to the New Testament when Jesus is given the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24. He's talking to his 12 Jewish disciples before Paul unpacked the mystery or was even given the mystery of the rapture. Paul wasn't on the scene yet. So you have to understand the chronology and you have to understand the audience that Jesus was talking to. It doesn't mean it doesn't have meaning for us, but in order to understand the context, you have to understand what the original audience would have heard, what it would have meant to them, and what the job of the theologian, so to speak, is try to figure out what the writer was originally intending to the immediate audience. And that doesn't mean there's not prophecies that have a near far fulfillment, but that's another topic for another day. But there are dual applications of the same prophecy. A couple of the first coming prophecies were near prophecy fulfillment, coming out of Egypt, and the virgin shall be with child. Those were some immediate context prophecies, but also had a later greater fulfillment in the first coming. And lastly, and this is a biggie, and this is one that you'll see a lot if you watch YouTube videos or if you've been studying Bible prophecy for a few years and you've seen different movements come up. This one's huge, and this is something to keep in mind and kind of will give you, be on your radar and give you a grid to look at new things as they pop up. You'll have that gut check, that flashing light on the dashboard when you see this pop up. So here it is, and this is the final one. Don't look for magic numbers, codes, or hidden meanings. God is not the author of confusion. He doesn't hide stuff from us. We have to search for it for sure. We have to study. But the book of Revelation, for example, it's called Revelation. It's all about revealing truth. God's not about giving certain, people that are spiritual enough or smart enough or have studied a new aspect of the Bible to look at different Bible codes or numbers in the Bible or link different things up that nobody's ever seen before. Steer clear from that. Always see that as a red flag. Always take that back and study it through your grid of good hermeneutics, good Bible study principles, and that kind of thing. So those are 7 dangers to studying Bible prophecy that I want you to stay away from and be aware of and that kind of thing. I hope that was helpful. Hopefully that gives you some insight in how to study Bible prophecy, and even some confidence in the Bible when you come to it, studying it on your own. So until next time, I'll talk to you soon.